The image we're looking at here is your cover for our machinery kit.
Yeah, that was a fun one. That was, to be honest, that's a good segue into what I'm doing today, because that is the exact process that I'm going to be showing right now, which is relying heavily on Octane's amazing instancing. So you have scenes like that, or scenes like, well, I'll show you some stuff.
Wow. Something new.
One of these is going to work.
At a certain point, we're going to go with it.
I think all of them work.
We
just need the graphics, the comic book graphics.
I love when he says things like that, because I know he doesn't mean it, but it still hits the heart. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Game Day. We are Kid Bash 3D, and this is part of the Lightbox Expo. What we got going on?
Well, we got to give them the answer to this trivia.
Thank you. What's the answer, Maxwell? So the question is, the trivia question right before the break is, Nintendo is one of the most popular names in gaming, but Nintendo began as a company selling which products?
This one I actually knew.
Did you?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, it was playing cards.
Playing cards.
Which I saw a bunch
Seems
of
like the chat knew it too.
Yeah, the chat knew that one too. Hints team. Got to step up your game. Can't fool these guys.
You're making this look a little easy on us here.
Well, right now we are about to be joined by an amazing concept artist and human being. We have Aaron Limonick from The Last of Us Part 2, and a
slew of amazing stuff. Incredibly pumped to see you, Aaron. How are you?
I'm doing great. My brother from another mother, and Max, the Studio City gangster, as we call him.
That's his name around the block. Well, dude, you're about to have a baby, right?
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what do we have a date yet? It's super soon.
It's in about a month.
Ooh,
dude.
You gotta get cranking on this demo then.
No, it might take me a little while.
Well, Aaron, I know we can't talk much about the work you do at Naughty Dog, but what was it like, just super high level? What's it like being part of one of the biggest games of the year?
I mean, just being part of something where that many people worked so hard and did that much great work is just such a privilege and such an honor to me. I couldn't say enough nice things about it. It's just it taught me so much. Everyone got so much better, and it's just a great sense of gratification to release it and just let everybody enjoy it.
Yeah, I gotta say, when the game came out, I was trying to hide social media because the whole Naughty Dog crew was like, "Okay, we've been working on all this artwork for so many years, and now it's time to blast." And I was like, "No, I gotta beat the game first." And then I had a solid week of just going through all of your paintings and the incredible work that you did. Massive congratulations.
Thanks, man. It's very dense. It's got a lot in there. It's just, in every sense of the word, it's just so much content.
Yeah. And while you were working on Last of Us, you also put out a Learn Squared course, which I've actually gone through, and my drawing skills are not great. Yours are pretty incredible, but I feel like I got significantly better from watching that. What made you decide to do the Learn Squared course, and how was that like for you?
Mache is one of my friends from a long time ago, and he asked me that he just thought I would be a good person to teach a sketching and design course because they didn't have anything like that. And I thought it'd be a nice area to touch upon, because in concept art, I think people tend to want to see rendering and want to see techniques and stuff, which of course is super fun, and I love that stuff as well. But back to my foundation of illustration and the quote unquote old school way of doing things, drawing things by hand, traditional media. I thought that it would be a nice way to bridge the gap between foundation skills, traditional drawing and painting, and showing how that stuff really does carry into the thought process going into concept art and entertainment art in general. So to me, that was why I thought it would be a fun thing to do. And, every time I do one of these, I personally learn so much about it, because you're forced to really evaluate what you actually know, and all the way down to the skeleton of what these concepts are. So to me, it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When I did my Learn Squared course, I think I leveled up several times of just having to condense my thoughts together in a succinct way. One of the things that impresses the hell out of me about you as an artist is your range of techniques. Beyond, being able to create just an incredible image, the fact that you're able to do what you do with watercolor and a pencil, and do what you do is in digital painting, but also using all the new technology in your process, Can you talk about how you use 3D right now and what your process is when you're doing a professional piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a little bit tricky to answer because it's literally different for every single image, which is one thing that I think my background kind of gives me an advantage in, is being able to kind of switch styles and switch things when it's needed, all the way down to sketching live right in front of people, directors, art directors, and whatnot. But in terms of the 3D aspect, it really does change, and the constant battle is to figure out how much 3D to use, whether it be only on the hero object, one thing, and because I know I have assets for everything else and I don't need it, or all the way up to stuff that I've done lately where it's 90%, 90% 3D, and I'm just touching things up, just adjusting things, like that image that you're showing right there. 95% 3D using assets from Nick Hyatt's terrain domain object. Yeah, and some VDB clouds and stuff like that. There's not really much 2D needed for that. So it is an interesting balance, but I do think that the one thing I will say is that it is, I think, a good idea to kind of think about that process before starting. I know it's so easy to say and it's always harder to do, but thinking about how you're going to go about doing the piece makes it a little bit better to imagine not retracing your steps or not wasting time in the wrong area of it. So yeah.
The image we're looking at here is your cover for our machinery kit that came out earlier this year.
Yeah, that was a fun one. That was, to be honest, that's a good segue into what I'm doing today, because that is the exact process that I'm going to be showing right now. Which is relying heavily on Octane's amazing instancing. So you have scenes like that, or scenes like, well, I'll show you some stuff, but the scenes can get very heavy, as you know, geometry wise. And I've always been annoyed in the past, before I started using this process that I'm using now, with even having to think about poly count. I think we should be past that at this point. We shouldn't even have to think about that anymore, because it's a hindrance that is it's not conducive to doing the best art. Obviously we have technical limitations, but I like the fact that you can bring a sculpt from ZBrush or 3D Coat right into Octane, and it could be 2 million, 5 million polys, and you can instance that thing a bunch of times and it will not even blink at that. So that's why I like to use it.
Awesome.
I love it. Well, let's dive in and screen share with you and take a look at what we're doing.
Absolutely.
And as we jump in, there's a question in the chat. Imaginate Better asks, will there be Q&A? As Aaron is demoing, throw your questions in the chat. We're going to be picking them up as we go. But we also want to make sure that he has time to showcase the things he wants to showcase.
So to jump right in, what I wanted to show was basically a little demo, a little sketch that I did just to show going from something like a quick thumbnail, like something that takes 10 minutes, really, really quick little idea with simplest values and simplest geometry, how you would then translate that further to a slightly more recognizable sketch, and then to what I would say like a more involved sketch, and by no way a finished illustration. Enough information for a modeler to block out something basic and kind of get things going, but not still not a huge time investment, an hour, a couple hours, whatever you want to call that. And I wanted to show how that can be translated into a quick environment using the instancing with Kitbash 3D assets. So a little bit of prep necessary for that. As everyone knows who's downloaded one of the kits, they are incredible. They come with materials, they come with with everything you're going to need, fully UV'd, textured, all that stuff. However, if you want to instance and you want to place individual elements, you probably want to think about, because it's overwhelming, there's so many pieces in each kit, how are you going to use all those pieces and quickly start applying them in the areas that you want? So recreating this sketch in 3D basically what I did is I got a kit that I thought was there's nothing that's going to be exact, but it was close enough. What am I looking for? I'm looking for some stairs, some sort of ancient temple looking architecture. Could be Mesopotamian, could be Mayan. There's even some Mediterranean elements in this structure right here, which we don't have anything like that. So in that case, I custom modeled my own central element, and I'm using Kitbash to fill in the rest of the environment. So I thought this was a perfect segue, because it really, with the machinery kit, it was really exactly the same process. So basically what I was talking about before is using Octane to instance things. You can rely on that because you can get these heavy chunks of 3D, which this is probably a 30, 40 million polygon scene, maybe. It could easily be. And these sculpts here are just instanced, duplicated, and rendered at the same time. So that is kind of the concept here. But what we're going to be doing is so much more efficient than this. This is my messy, personal modeling, where Kitbash is very efficient, very clean. So I did this model. This is using cubes. I wanted to keep it as relatable to the entire audience as possible. Anyone that can use a 3D program can learn how to model a cube in about 5 minutes, maybe even just shift click. And just by stretching them around, I tried to simulate the basic composition that we were looking at with the sketch from before, right? So let's just dive into how I set the scene up before I go into showing how I did this. In Octane, this is just my basic scene. I have a couple planes which have alphas to create some holes, which will give me those nice cast shadows to limit the light exactly where I want. I've got a HDR environment, which is a beautiful HDR that I have here, just to simulate some kind of daylight. Not super important because, again, it's going to be a little vague what the environment is when we're inside this canyon here, per the sketch. And let's see what else. So yeah, I basically tried to accomplish what I could to simulate that scene. I put a fog volume here, which in Octane is basically like a loaf of bread that's made out of clouds, and you just like park your scene inside of it basically. And that becomes then now everything volumetric, everything is reacting to light the way it would if a smoke machine filled a room. So if you put lights in, you project lights onto things, you put more smoke in the scene, whatever, and we'll talk about all that stuff. But that's basically what this is. So returning to my camera here. This is the camera that so go ahead. One
question, sorry, as we go. Question that came up on this. Did you block out the scene in the Octane standalone software, or did you block it out in another software and bring it in?
No, I just blocked it out in another software real quick.
Cool.
You can, so to creating the mesh, you could literally do it in any software. Like it doesn't really matter. Octane's, it's a rendering software. So the only downside to that versus like rendering straight in Blender is Blender, well, you can do modeling, you can do everything all in one. But the specifically what I like about Octane is that it separates the process where I'm designing it out, and then now I'm only rendering. I've already made my choices on design. I'm only going to be playing with the amount of details and how to flesh out what my design already was. It's totally subjective. It's totally up to the individual, and they can, anyone can do it however they want. But this is a particular process that I'm leaning on in this case. And again, I will do it differently, different times. So this isn't the only way to do it.
Cool.
So
I said thanks for the question, but then I said it under my breath. So
all good.
You're up.
So let's just break apart this thing a little bit more. So here is in the middle my central temple, which I modeled apart from this. So what we have there is, you can see it's on its own. It's covering up the original block mesh, which we don't want to see anymore. And then I've got some elements on the side of using pieces of the Ancients kit, which is what I'm using here. And that I'm just kind of instancing a few pieces of it that you can see here. This group of geometry is the node structure here. All of my Kitbash assets are going to be running through this node group right here, which is then connecting to my geometry node. So let's talk about materials. Can I talk about materials for a second?
I don't know. We're going to have to check with the higher ups on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, materials are good.
You're clear. That's cleared.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. So you guys are going to call the police when you find out this, but I didn't use the exact materials from Kitbash 3D. I used some of them, and I didn't use the entire material set. I used only one of them, and then the rest of them I left out because I wanted simple, and I wanted everything to be treated the same, including my original asset, which I made myself. So I wanted to make sure that had the same materials as the Kitbash set, which, that presents a problem when you have the Kitbash set has a very custom set of materials and then you bring in original elements, they won't be textured the same. So I took one of the brick textures. So let's analyze that for a second. I took the brick textures. I took the UVs, took the roughness pass, and sorry, not the UVs, the normals and the roughness pass, and I filtered those through a triplanar node, which basically gives everything on the model the brick texture and the normals and the roughness, but on the top surfaces, the Y positive surface, everything has a grass texture. So that way, no matter what I bring in, no matter what custom elements I bring in, that same material will treat them all exactly the same, therefore unifying them together, including my garbage block mesh. So right now you can see that it's there, but it's not standing out as so hideous because it's getting that same material. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start applying these new 3D elements and covering up elements that I haven't touched already. So we have this giant arch, which I have there in the background. Now you can see if I wanted to bring that a little bit closer, we can do that, and you'll see that it is getting those same materials. There's a weird little bug that's happening when it comes in contact with the fog plane, and it gets this weird little stripe of green on it, which I could explain why, but it's because the fog has to be in a giant cube, which is not, it's not continuous throughout the infinite environment. It's only confined to the volume that you set it. So that's why when the mesh comes in contact with that cube, you're going to get a seam right there. As long as you don't, then it's not an issue. It's a very minor issue, but it's one of those quirks of Octane, I guess you could say.
I feel like the new what brusher you're using is how many GPUs do you have? That's the question that's been happening for the last 3 days.
You know, to be honest with you, this is a 1080 Ti. This is not a gnarly setup. It's a pretty 2000 and late setup. You know what I mean? Oof. Now it's time to really call the police. No. But yeah, it is really not it's very light. And I would recommend for anybody who's interested in getting a really nice setup, I would recommend getting something like a 2080 RTX card, or something along those lines. I think that would probably do you a little better, and it'll have a longer longevity as well. But that's what I'm using at the moment. Right? Yeah, I see it there.
I love that, though. It's what you do with the machine, not necessarily the machine.
I thought we came to the conclusion that it was all about the brush that you use.
It was the brush. It's the wand.
I think in a lot of cases, it absolutely can be, and it sort of depends on what you're after. You know, like what exactly you're trying to do there. I think I think it absolutely could be the case sometimes, but. As far as brushes go, yeah, I mean, if you look at some people, the way they use a regular old round brush, it seems like the best thing you've ever seen in your life. But, you know, you look at Craig Mullins doing something with a round brush, that's not the same thing as me doing something with a round brush, you know what I mean? So it's slightly different. Oh, you know what? I didn't put this thing in the center. Never mind. Forget about the stairs for a second.
Pay no attention to the stairs.
That's funny. We think about, at least with assets a lot, we talk about it almost like you're a chef, and we're trying to give you the best ingredients possible. But at the end of the day, it's how you use those ingredients that you're going to create an amazing dish.
I agree with that. I think that's a fair point.
I love this, how you customize these materials, and just adding the grass on top of it in such a quick way adds so much breakup to the scene.
Well, one thing that I learned, you know, just from making games for so long, and obviously you could say this is a concept used in illustration, which it definitely is. But in games, you know, when you drop into a scene and you're looking at this really complex environment, one of the first things that game designers will have an issue with is that it gets too noisy and things get too complex and too chaotic. So one thing that I think helps that right off the bat is establishing what's a ground plane, what's a top surface, what's a side surface, you know, just so that it doesn't get overwhelming with detail. And I think that's one of the main things I'm trying to do is unify everything together. Not to, obviously, if you can use the kit bash materials in your scene, it's obviously preferable, because that is that is a PBR, peanut butter and reality setup. And no, it's not what that stands for, but I mean, I think people got that. But that's a setup that is going to look the best. It's going to give you that photoreal look. So, which is great if you're looking for the photoreal look. But in some cases, you kind of just want the unification and the simplicity. So to me, the brick texture that you guys included in the kit looked great. I tried a bunch of different ones, but that's the one that to me gave me the most sense of scale, because you see the little tiny bricks from far away. And when you squint your eyes, you still get the same value read that we're looking for, but you don't need that crazy amount of detail. It's just enough. It's just enough, And, just to touch on one thing that I was going to talk about is asking yourself the question, do you plan on painting over the scene? So if you do plan on painting over stuff, like if you plan on actually doing like a more illustrative look to it, or something maybe, an example I often give is that artist Richard Wright is an incredible artist, and he utilizes 3D in a very smart way, not to blow up his spot. Sorry, Richard, if you don't want me to talk about the way you work, but I'm praising how good he is about utilizing the 3D techniques without making it look 3D. He makes it look like an illustration at the end, but he's using 3D in a very, very inventive and smart way. So what do you need physically based, or what do you need all the materials to be photoreal for if you're doing that? If you're doing it that way, then you could kind of think about it slightly differently, and you can have a more simplistic approach. I mean, if you're doing something that's supposed to look like an animated film, in some cases, you could probably just use very simple materials and then end up painting over stuff. Not to generalize what that art style looks like, but in some cases, I think that could be said. In other cases, maybe you want one or two of them and you're going to plan on painting over it. So I would say if you're going to be painting over stuff and you plan on having a more illustrative look, then it may be to your disadvantage to go too far into the materials, because you're just going to paint over that stuff. So what would be the advantage there? This is, again, super subjective, because it's really up to the individual of how they want to go about it.
Yeah. On that note, Feral Fox 82 in the chat asks, how do you do illustration looks and styles after 3D? So if you do want to start with the 3D base, but you want to make sure that the end result looks painterly or more in an illustration style, what's your approach there?
I would say, well, that's a whole other thing altogether, which is basically, what axis am I on there? That's the sorry, thinking out loud for 1 second. I would say the trick with that is getting some practice painting over 3D. How much do you actually want to paint over it? How much do you need to paint over it? Is kind of just understanding. It comes with experience. I wish I had a better answer for you on the recipe, but it's one of those things that needs to be done to taste, like how much do you want to see the 3D? Well, if you don't want to see the 3D, the answer is very simple. Attack those polygonal edges, all those perfectly sharp. See how the edges are so sharp because it's perfect geometry. You got to go after those edges and start breaking those up right away, whether that be overlaying photos, darkened layers that are chipping away at the edge, or painting by hand. You want to go after those edges first. So that would be like, again, this bridge, if it were me, if I was already rendered this out and I was going and doing an illustration, first thing I would do is say, all right, we need to get rid of these perfectly sharp edges right there. Because if this is 10,000-year-old stone, it would be much more broken up than that. So you definitely want to take care of that. I would say probably, if not first, that would be on the top 3.
I love that idea, and it's such a good point of, those places, those straight lines and those straight edges are going to catch your eye first. And if you're trying to hide 3D, painting over the entire image is a pretty monumental task and almost undoes the reasons why you're using 3D. But if you can take the couple things that are the giveaway and just add paint stroke or texture to those places that are going to catch your eye, that might be enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. It really it takes so little. Okay, so to the answering the question of the artist, I can't remember the artist's name that asked the question, but it takes very, very little work. It's way less work than you think to paint over 3D to get it to not look like 3D. So I think people look at it and they're just thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna have to paint over every single pixel of this thing. Not really. It's not quite that complex. It's just the areas that look obviously 3D. Like for example, if you just zoomed in and looked at this little rectangle of brick, is there anything about that that looks necessarily 3D? Like not really. And even let's take it a step further. Even if you took that and you made a couple little brush strokes with opaque paint in there, digital paint, obviously, to break that up, I promise you, try it out and tell me that it doesn't, and ask somebody, do that to the entire painting. Just kind of touch it up a little bit and take care of those edges. And you're going to see that it's going to be very hard for someone to tell how you did it. And I think that's not for everybody, but that is absolutely what I'm going for. A lot of my work is not the most photoreal. It's not the most anything, but the one thing that I am going for is I'm going for a look that looks like illustration and, whatever that means. I want it to look like a cohesive package, not necessarily that it's a photoreal render or it's a painting or it's a whatever. I just want it to look like an illustration that's cohesive. So if that makes any sense.
That's awesome. Yeah. I've never heard that before. That makes so much sense, and I want to go take that into my work now.
Oh, you can do magic with it. You're a true master.
You're too kind, and that means a ton coming from you. Question here, and by the way, at any point, Aaron, tell us to shut up and let you work.
No, I love it. I can keep asking questions as much as you want.
I'm going to give this name my best shot. Amir Borghay asks, do you enjoy working on 3D as much as you like working with a more painterly or illustrative approach? I think I'm going to try to rephrase that and say, do you like working in 3D more than 2D? Do you like bouncing between the two? Do you go through phases?
I absolutely go through phases, and I think that they really do support each other quite a bit. So I think it's really nice to always be thinking about both, because the reality is that they are separate, but the way, what leads me to this process, first of all, is like, I did that sketch that I showed you, not intending to do what I'm doing right now. I just did that sketch just because for fun, just to talk about composition and what I thought was cool about that shot that I saw in my head. But then that gives you an idea that you wouldn't have thought of in 3D, in my opinion. I don't think that you necessarily think the exact same way. And so in some cases, you may find that by doing both, you're going to expand your ability to visualize in a way that maybe you couldn't. I know that it is a valid way to work. And I know a lot of artists who do work this way, where you kind of just go right into 3D, start blocking stuff out, and find the composition in the camera, which is completely valid in its own right. That's a different technique. I would just make sure to realize that it's a different thing and that will give you some results. And then doing composition sketching, really getting down to the basics. One of the things that I love about this industry and I love about being an artist is the fact that and when I was a student, I was always so blown away by artists that were much more experienced, and I look at their work and the absolute simplicity of the composition. Why can't I do that? Why is it that that's so cool? I could do pretty much the same thing, and I just can't quite do it. There's something amazing about art where that happens, where there's something going on where each individual kind of has their signature thing, a deeper understanding of simplicity that allows it to kind of work like that. And it's not so easily repeatable. So, nothing has changed. My opinion hasn't changed on that. I still feel the same way when I look at people's work. I'm just thinking like, why it's like thinking about songwriting or something. How many notes are there? Not that many, but there's infinite. We'll make songs until the human race goes extinct from an asteroid in 100,000 million years.
Yeah.
It's not a real number.
It's rough.
But you know what I'm saying? Like the elements that make composition are very, very simple. So to me, this is a very long-winded answer, but that's what I am known to do. So sorry. The pursuit of the simplicity that comes with traditional approach and foundation just traditional sketching or even just digital sketching and not necessarily doing things all in 3D, that leads to, I feel, it leads to a kind of a different understanding and a different way. It expresses more style and expresses something else than doing things in a way that, I don't want to say clinical, but for me, someone who grew up drawing and painting in oil and acrylic and gouache, 3D feels like it could get overly clinical if you're not careful to watch that stuff. So that's my best way of saying. I could have just said, I like to do both.
No, I love that you're talking about this, because it's something that I think, especially artists starting out, there's this feeling of like, I just can't get a handle on the fundamentals. And it's one of those things that I feel like so many artists, even, in their career, are like, I just never really got a grasp of the fundamentals. And I think a lot of people have this idea that the fundamentals are really complicated, but they're called fundamentals. There's the trick of the fundamentals is how to truly wrap your head around something that is so simple. The color, there is not that many colors. The color wheel is the color wheel. And there's not that many combinations. You have your primaries, your secondaries, your tertiaries. And, it's the idea of, now that you have a full understanding on the very limited amount of tools that you have at your disposal when you're creating art, how are you going to use those in a new and different way to accomplish a goal?
Exactly. You said it perfectly.
And I love what you're doing here. I love that you bring the pencil sketching or black and white value drawings into that, to say, I'm just going to focus on composition, on value. And then when I start building in 3D, now I have a very clear direction. I have a clear goal, and I can just be focused on executing and letting those moments of serendipity happen.
So yeah, that brings up, now that you say that, that brings up another topic, which is basically that thinking about being a painter, the thing I always hated was the block-in. Everybody knows, and this is for students and professionals alike, I would have to assume, everybody knows that when you start your painting, you think it sucks. And that's pretty universal. I don't want to generalize, but I feel like that's pretty universal among artists. You hate the block-in because it's always just like, I just can't stand looking at this. I can't wait till it's blocked in enough where I can actually have fun with this thing. And to me, using 3D in a finished illustration gets you past that. You're past the block-in by the time you're even starting. So you're getting right to the fun part. You're getting right to the, let's see what we can do with this. Let's see how much cooler we can make this with these, with the painting and the texturing and the, whatever, all those different things that you're going to do to make this much more interesting. I think that's being able to do both. Thinking about, all right, now by the time I go back to the painting part, I am going to have so much fun because I get to just detail stuff out. So I personally, my process, I like to use the painting part for the design phase at the very, very beginning. And then I like to block stuff out in 3D and do the heavy lifting of the rendering in 3D. And then I like to go right to the fun part and do the rest, the painting. You got to think about, when you're in Photoshop, you can copy and paste elements in 2D. Once you have a render, there's no rule that says I can't now mess with it and copy pieces of the render and stretch them, squish them, duplicate them, do whatever. It exponentially increases your ability to do better stuff because you're not wasting that energy gassing you out. By the time you even get to the painting part, you're just so tired from blocking everything in that your creative energy is not there the same as it would be if you just got right to the point. You know what I mean?
I always call that, and I think a lot of people refer to it as the valley of suck.
I think that's a good way to say it.
Just got to get through the valley. You start with the idea and you're on cloud 9 and you just are like, oh, this is going to be awesome. And then you start blocking it out and it's like, oh, this sucks. And you just got to keep moving forward. And then at some point you're climbing your way out of the valley and it starts to look good again.
You're right. I think that's a thing that comes with experience, which is like, you learn to just trust the process, right? And you got to remind yourself, I have struggled through so many images. It always ends up okay. Don't flip out. You're going to be fine, right? And you think that way. But the reality is that what if you could just skip that, Yeah. Like, to me, that is if for no other reason right there, that for me is worth doing a process that somehow involves 3D. If you're a student that's never considered it or is a purist or whatever, trust me, you're already using digital. You're already cheating. If we're going to use the word cheating, there's no such thing as cheating. If you're a fine artist, okay, then that is a separate thing. But if we're doing entertainment art, why would you limit your tools to make your process smoother and dedicate more of your energy to the creative part, which is really what we're all trying to do?
Yeah. There was a great question in the chat asking about, how much would you recommend practicing fundamentals and whatever that means in whatever way. I think there's a different way to think about that, because I think when you're creating artwork at Aaron's level and on the projects that Aaron's doing, he's using those fundamentals every day. He doesn't at this stage need to go and specifically practice that. Unless you think otherwise, Aaron, are you doing studies still to try and practice perspective or color theory or anything like that?
I think you're practicing with that. You're practicing it without even realizing that you're practicing it. That's what I think is what happens once you get more experience with this stuff. Because I think there is an element of understanding. You need to be conscious of those things. But when someone is when you're a professional, I think the key is to not be conscious of it and just be spontaneous and do it automatically. So yes, sometimes I catch myself doing things that I think are mistakes, in which case then I have to go back to the drawing board and make sure that I'm being conscious of those elements aside from that. So to me, yes, it is important to do studies. And I think, well, it just depends. I like to do it just for fun. To me, it's not even a question of doing it for the sake of educating myself, because when you've done it for 20 years, thinking about 1-point perspective or 2-point perspective isn't necessarily always going to get you what you need. But it is definitely something that sometimes you realize, what is it about this piece that I don't like? Oddly enough, I drew it in a wide angle lens, and that is why you don't think about that when you're drawing. You just draw cool stuff, right? You don't think about what is drawing a 35 millimeter versus a 50 millimeter, or something even, a 30 millimeter versus a 50 millimeter. Well, there is a difference. And in perspective, they would just call that like widening the, fish-eyeing it or what, in a basic perspective class, that's what that would be called. But sometimes you do have to think about that. And again, another good point, 3D really does bring that to the surface when you have to think about that. What lens are you using? Well, I can't get this entire scene in the shot, so I'm going to have to use a shorter lens to widen the frame and give myself a little bit more of that distortion, or vice versa. So yeah, I think it's super important to be conscious of it and to do studies that enhance that knowledge. Like, I don't know why you wouldn't.
Question in the chat from Amir. How do you control your value and color composition when you're working in Octane?
Well, that's actually a loaded question, because there are several different ways. There's the fog, right? The fog controls atmospheric perspective and how much things get unified in value when they go into the distance. There's the light itself, which is a whole myriad of things that are, what kind of lighting are you using in conjunction with that fog? Are you even using fog? That's another question. I think it's like, for example, going back to that sketch, I was using a decent amount of atmospheric perspective. So if you're using atmospheric perspective at all, you need to use fog, right? In order to make things get more atmospheric and simplify the values as it goes back into the distance. And then in terms of the value grouping, sometimes you're not going to get exactly what you want out of the 3D, which is why it's good to go in and then adjust things in 2D. For example, if I maybe don't want the shadows to be as dark, or I want them to get some kind of warm bounce in them just in the light areas and not in the shadows, sometimes that's a quicker thing to just do after the fact, and adjust those values after the fact. But it's a combination of lighting and fog. That's really, I don't know how else to simplify that anymore. I don't know if you agree, Max, but
yeah, I mean,
that's what I'd say.
That's great. I think one of the things, and this kind of leads to another question that we got from Diego Hope, is using all of these elements to create an emotion in the frame. And I think this is something that you're a master of, Aaron, and the work that you've done in The Last of Us 2 is just a perfect example of that. you can look at the paintings that you've created for that, and all of your paintings, you can tell exactly what emotion you're supposed to feel. What is your thought process when you're creating or coming up with the emotion, or how to convey an emotion in an environment?
That's one of those real art questions, isn't it? That's a tough one. I thought I was going to get away with this one without having to answer tough questions. No, I'm just joking. No, in all seriousness, I think you got to go with your gut. They teach that in school the same way they teach color theory. You know, like red means passionate, it means excited. Blue means sad. You know, like, okay, you could think about it that way, but that's not really going to get you the deepest level of connection with your artwork. I think you just have to feel in your mind. You got to imagine, tell yourself a story about what when you're doing your image. What kind of story are you telling? What's going on in the piece? How would you feel walking through that? Is it adventurous? Is it oppressive? Is it awe-inspiring? Is it wondrous? Is it dangerous? All these things can be conveyed through shape orientation, which goes back to like very basic day one composition class. Do you have a big, heavy object above you? Well, that would make you feel a little uneasy, right? Something big, blocky in the scene, like the very beginning of the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope. You got the Star Destroyer flying, and then you got a little tiny rebel ship underneath it. How does that make you feel? Pretty small, I would imagine. You know, that makes you feel something. So I would have to imagine, tell yourself a story about what you're making, and that's probably going to give you, go with your gut. How does that make you feel? That's about it.
That's amazing. Well, Aaron, thank you so much. I can't believe that we're out of time already. And I think the amount that you've been able to create in this from the sketch to, I mean, honestly, this image already looks like it could be final. Thank you for jumping on here and sharing your wisdom and your process.
Absolutely. You know, I want to say thank you to you guys, because for everything you do for the art community and everything you've done, you know, really some content creators like yourselves have really made it, really changed the game. And for all of us artists out there, you know, I want to raise our lavender lattes to, oh wait, no, that's only Santa Monica, huh? But no, in all seriousness, cheers to you guys and thank you. And I can't wait till one day the world is different and we can meet face to face again.
Us too. Yeah, can't wait for that.
Well, thank you, man. Your work is brilliant. The chat is already blowing up with some raging applause. Thank you for spending some time here with us today, Aaron.
Absolutely.